So, today we're going to break down the argument from a viral video that lays out a really specific way of looking at the world. The basic idea? That all these big global events you see in the news aren't random at all. They're actually battles in a hidden war for the future. Let's dive in and unpack what this perspective is all about. Everything really kicks off with this pretty startling quote from Thomas Friedman, the columnist for the New York Times. He was talking about a potential war with Iran, and he basically said he was torn. On one hand, he thinks the Iranian regime is awful, but on the other, he said he didn't want a U.S. victory if it meant Donald Trump got a political boost from it.
And that right there is the central puzzle the source material tries to solve. Why would that be the calculation? The video we're analyzing argues this isn't just one guy's opinion. It's actually a clue to a much bigger, unspoken conflict happening behind the scenes.
So here's the core thesis of the source. What we're all watching isn't just politics as usual. Nope. It's a high-stakes war between two completely different visions for how the entire world should be run.
The source basically splits the world into two camps. On one side, you've got the sovereign nations. Think leaders like Donald Trump in the US or Viktor Orbán in Hungary. People who believe in national self-determination above all else. And on the other side, a globalist empire. This group, according to the source, is made up of international financiers, the media, and big institutions like the EU. And their goal is global governance and control.
So how does the source even begin to make this case? Well, it builds its argument on three main pillars of evidence. And the first one takes us right back to where we started, that Thomas Friedman quote about Iran.
The way the source interprets that quote is this. For some of the media, the number one goal isn't necessarily peace. The bigger priority, it claims, is to make absolutely sure Donald Trump doesn't get a political win, even if that means a really nasty regime gets to stick around.
All right, for the second piece of the puzzle, the source takes us over to Europe. It zooms in on a political firestorm that's been raging there, using Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán as its main example.
And to set the stage for this, the source pulls this quote from American politician J.D. Vance, which he actually delivered in Hungary. The argument is that the fight is between leaders who are trying to actively rebuild their nations versus a global establishment that's just happy to, quote, manage the decline.
So what exactly did Orbán do to start this fight? Well, according to the video, he took a whole series of steps that directly challenged the EU establishment. He kicked out organizations funded by George Soros, he pushed a Christian nationalist agenda, he fought against the EU's open borders policies, he opposed the war in Ukraine, and he made sure Hungary kept getting its energy from Russia.
And the EU's response? According to the source, it was absolutely massive. It claims the EU hit back by holding back a staggering $35 billion in funding that was owed to Hungary. The source describes it as a deliberate attempt to starve the country's economy into submission. Now, what's really fascinating is how the source frames this. It doesn't see it as just a simple policy argument. It calls it a textbook regime change operation. And as proof, it points not just to the economic pressure, but to actual threats to strip Hungary of its voting rights inside the EU.
Okay, pillar number 3. This one brings the whole story right back home to the United States. It suggests we need to look at the first impeachment of Donald Trump through this exact same lens of a hidden war.
The source uses some very specific language here. It calls the impeachment a color revolution hit job. It's basically framing the whole thing not as a legitimate constitutional process, but as a fraudulent, foreign-style political operation, the kind of thing designed to take out a leader you don't like.
And the whole basis for this claim, according to the source, is newly declassified documents. The central charge is that the entire impeachment was built on a complete and total fabrication, a phony whistleblower complaint.
Okay, so let's walk through the play-by-play that the source alleges. Step 1, a secret meeting between the supposed whistleblower and Congressman Adam Schiff. Step 2, the Inspector General suddenly changes a key rule, which now allows a complaint to be based on secondhand hearsay. Step 3, the complaint gets filed. And then, Step 4, the source claims that the Inspector General's own testimony about this whole process gets classified and buried by Schiff. So what was the real motive here, according to the source? It argues the impeachment wasn't really about the phone call. It claims the whole thing was a preemptive strike, a cover-up operation designed to stop anyone from looking into the Biden family's dealings in Ukraine right before the 2020 election.
And wait, there's one more layer to this. The source also alleges that there was a specific FBI counterintelligence operation, codenamed Round River, whose job was to slap the label of Russian disinformation on any damaging information about the Bidens and Ukraine, just to make sure nobody ever investigated it.
Okay, so this is where it all comes together. This is the synthesis, where the source takes these three seemingly disconnected stories, the media and Iran, the EU versus Hungary, and Trump's impeachment, and weaves them all into one single overarching narrative. The whole point is that these aren't random separate events. According to this view, they are all just different fronts in the same war, a war that the source says Donald Trump is waging to take apart this globalist empire by going after its key institutions, the media, the EU, and the intelligence community.
And to prove that Trump's actions are actually shaking things up, the source points to this quote from a former top British national security advisor. He flat out declared that the famous decades-old special relationship between the US and the UK is, well, over.
But here's the twist. The source doesn't see this as a failure. It frames it as a huge victory. It claims Trump survived the special relationship, which it alleges was being used against him, and is now moving on to successfully dismantle other alliances, like NATO, which it calls the Praetorian Guard of the globalist empire.
So in the end, the story this source is telling is one of victory. The narrative concludes that Trump isn't just fighting back, he's actually winning. In this telling, he's outsmarting all of his opponents and blazing a new trail for a world of strong, sovereign nations.
And that leaves us with a really provocative final thought. The worldview we've just laid out reframes pretty much every global conflict. It's not about country versus country anymore, but idea versus idea, nationalism versus globalism. So we'll leave you with the question that this source poses. Is that the real defining conflict of our time?